Good day, everyone. My name is, of course, John Corstein. I'm Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center here at the Mariners Museum Park in Newport News, Virginia. And yet I'm reaching out to everyone today, and we're talking about a very select topic, and that is river monitors. Winfield Scott noted at the outset of the Civil War that a Union victory could be achieved by control of the Mississippi River alone. He believed that the entire Mississippi Valley, using only 12 to 20 gunboats and 60,000 soldiers, would be able to achieve that goal. As we know, far more resources are going to be needed. However, the Federals would eventually be able to allow the father of all rivers flow unvexed to the sea. So we can see from this map right here how the Mississippi Valley is a main course in the center of the United States. And of course, St. Louis is a major shipbuilding center, as well as other places like, believe it or not, Pittsburgh. And so there is a vast amount of resources that the Federals have and are able to use these river resources to be able to invade the South. Unlike how the rivers flow in eastern North Carolina and Virginia, these rivers flow north to south. And as a result of that, they are a perfect avenue of invasion for the Federals. Now, the Federals at the beginning of the war, Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles was so preoccupied with establishing a blockade of the Confederate coastline that he could not be troubled with building gunboats for service on the Western waters. And so that results in the development of what is known as the Western Gunboat Flotilla, and it was controlled by the War Department. Here are two classic type of steamers that are going to be used in the Western waters. And of course, we have a paddle wheel, Ironclad, and then we also have a mortar scow, as we would call it. Now, basically, John Rogers, Commander John Rogers, is going to be in command of the flotilla. However, he will soon be replaced by Andrew Foote. Basically, already Rogers has started the ball rolling with the Lexington and the Conestoga and the Tyler. They are called timberclads. But it is really, this is a river monitor right here, and a very unique one, the USS Ozark. And this is the brainchild between most of the ironclads on the Mississippi River or in the Western waters. This is, of course, James Eads. He begins constructing ironclads based on the Samuel Pook, which is known as the Pook Turtles, and they are the City-class ironclads. Now, this initial group of ironclads, which are going to be armed with guns like this. This is a 11-inch Dahlgren shell gun, which changes warfare. That's why we need to have ironclads. So they're going to be able to clear the upper Mississippi all the way down, these Pook's Turtles and other variants of City-class ironclads are going to be able to ensure the capture of Island Number 10, Memphis, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson. And so the big trouble is many of these City-class ironclads have serious flaws. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. And these flaws are, number one, they're not shotproof. In fact, they have 2.5 inches of iron protecting their casemates. No stern armor was added to cover the rear paddle wheel. The decks were not plated, making the ships vulnerable to plunging shot. City-class ironclads had no hull protection, and if hulled, as we know they will be, the lack of watertight compartments will result in the rapid sinking of an ironclad. Despite all these weaknesses, The city-class ironclads, as well as timberclads and tinclads, served the Union well, and enabled the capture of the Cumberland, the Tennessee, Central Tennessee, northern Alabama, and much of the Mississippi River. However, I'm going to tell you the March 8 and 9 Battle of the Ironclads created an excitement throughout the North as the nation clamored for more turreted ironclads. This fever, sometimes called ram fever or monitor fever, spread westward, and turreted gunboats had to be added to the Union Mississippi Squadron to ensure victory in many people's minds. 4 different river monitor classes were developed. However, only 7 of the 9 ironclads that are going to be begun during the war will actually participate in active operations. The first class of ironclads or river monitors is going to be the Neosho class. And this 2-vessel design was of the Neosho and the Osage. And these ironclads were the only monitors using stern wheels, believe it or not. This class was designed by James Eads, who designed most of the ironclads in the Mississippi Valley. And many of them were built at his Union Iron Works in Cartelet, Mississippi. Now, both of the Neosho class are going to be launched in early 1863. Their characteristics are going to include a tonnage of 523 tons, length of 180 feet, a beam of 45 feet, draft, you ready for this, 4.6 feet. And that is amazing. And with a great speed of 10.6 knots. Now they use horizontal steam engines, stern wheel with 4 boilers. These guns were armed with, or these ironclads are armed with 2 11-inch Dahlgren, and they used what are known as Erickson style turrets. We're going to get into the big question about different style of turrets in just a little bit. Now, the turret's going to be located at the bow of each vessel. The pilot house sat on top of the rear deck house, and another deck house was placed between the steam-powered turret and the funnel. Now, I have to tell you, yet another ironclad design is going to become popular, and that is the Ozark. And the Ozark is another class of individual river monitors. The ship was based on a Navy Department design that was built by Hamilton Collier Company of Peoria. The Ozark was very underpowered and could really be described as a very experimental warship, which proved to be basically a failure in many, many ways. It had several structural flaws. The steam engines powered 4 bladed propellers. The hull was divided by transverses, and I have to tell you, it was fitted with 3 rudders. The Ozark had an Erickson designed turret and an armored pilot house on top. The officers' quarters were in a pine deck house on the hurricane deck, and then there was also between the 2 funnels of the Ozark, there are going to be actually another hurricane deck is going to be installed. Now later, they're going to add 4 Dahlgrens to the mix. First, they're in open air positions on pivot mounts, and eventually they will build a pine wooden casemate to house them. The Monitor Ozark was selected to use an underwater battery. In fact, what they were trying to do is to fire a 9-inch Dahlgren through a pipe in the side of the hull beneath the waterline. This concept would not work. In fact, most of the Ozark concepts are very, very bad. It only made 7.9 knots. It had 6 inches of armor on the turret, 2.5 inches on the sides, and it actually was overarmed with two 11-inch Dahlgrens, one 10-inch Dahlgren, and three 9-inch Dahlgrens with a complement of 120 people. These first monitors are going to be used during Major General Nathaniel Prentice Banks' Red River Campaign. We all know about Banks. He is a political general. He is, as we might say, somewhat incompetent. In fact, one person said, "You think that Banks was such a smart man that he knew not to try to really command the troops himself." Banks was the bobbin boy of Waltham, Massachusetts, saved pennies to own the factory. He was a politician, formerly Democrat, now Republican. He actually worked on a concept that we're going to call the Red River Campaign. And actually, this concept was kind of cooked up by Banks, where he's going to use a 20,000-man army that he has. Then he's going to use 15,000 men from William Tecumseh Sherman's army. Now, remember, Sherman's army is going to be needed to do what? Move against Atlanta. That's one of the most important things to happen in spring of 1864. And then another 7,000 soldiers are going to come down from Little Rock, Arkansas, and the destination is Shreveport, which is the headquarters or the royal throne of the Kirby Smithdom, actually Edmund Kirby Smith's command of the Trans-Mississippi Department. Now, the movement coming down from Arkansas is going to be commanded by Frederick Steele, and actually this is all planned to go to Shreveport. One of the critical concepts of the campaign is to utilize Porter's Mississippi Squadron to support the transports, the supplies, and also to be able to actually be floating artillery. And then also, one of the purposes of this campaign was to capture Confederate cotton. Now, one of the big fears that they had in 1864, that yes, the French had invaded Mexico, and what they did not want, the Union did not want, is the Trans-Mississippi Department allying itself with French-occupied Mexico. And so Banks believes that he can secure vast quantities of cotton, which will run the mills in the north, and he could also use Shreveport as a base by which to conquer East Texas. This is very, very critical. Now, here's Banks looking very noble. Here is Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter, and the Union gunboats. Now, here is the Osage. You can see the stern wheel compartment at the back of the vessel. Then you can see the Erickson turret. Now, this is a little improper because it's got 4 gun ports and it did not have 4 gun ports. So I just want to let you know that this is not quite accurate, but a low draft vessel with a armored turret seemed to be excellent. This is the sister vessel on the Chateau, and you can see how they have actually developed a turtle-back design. Now, Porter's fleet's going to consist of the Essex, the Benton, the Choctaw, the Ozark, the Louisville, the Carteret, Eastport, Pittsburgh, Mound City, Osage, and the Shoho, as well as other wooden steamers like the Lexington. Now, the campaign is going to go somewhat happy at first. The Confederates are going to have to give up Fort de Rousse, which is named for one of the first West Point graduates from Louisiana. And so Porter was able to get his ships above the falls at Alexandria. However, there's problems that soon occurred. There was a drought in the region, number one. So the river levels are low. And Nathaniel Banks, as per usual, is going to be defeated by the command of Lieutenant General Richard Taylor at the Battle of Mansfield on April 1864. Now, Banks is able to gain a tactical victory at Pleasant Hill on 9 April, but I have to tell you, Banks was in full retreat. General A.J. Smith's command was returned to Sherman, and almost daily there are going to be skirmishes between the Confederates and the Union gunboats and troops. Now, I have to tell you that as the Federals start coming down the river, many ships are going to run aground, and one of those is going to be the USS Osage, which is going to be captained by Lieutenant Commander Thomas O. Selfridge Jr. And the Osage ran aground. Selfridge did everything he could to get his ship off the sandbank. However, he in turn had to fight extremely unusual battle. The Osage, of course, is a turret vessel. Now, there's a guy known as Brigadier General Thomas Greene. He was a hero of the Texas War of Independence. He was a hero of the Mexican War. He was a hero of the Texas Rangers. He was clerk of the Texas Supreme Court. He was an outstanding man. Actually, it was said of him that Greene was a man who, when out of whiskey, was a mild-mannered gentleman, but when in supply of Old Bursthead, he was all about a fight. Now, at Blair's Landing, you can well imagine a Union monitor being on the side of ground, and that Greene came up with his cavalry and shouts that he was going to show everyone how to fight. And it was said that he had gotten a hold of a little Louisiana rum and was crazed, and he led a cavalry charge against the Osage. And Selfridge could believe what he saw before his eyes. Greene was killed by a cannonball that took off part of his head, and this was disastrous for the Confederates. Now, the Osage had already, I have to say, was able to escape from there. However, the Osage will be moved out of the river and will later run aground in Helena, Arkansas, and will send up to its integrity of its hull was damaged, hogged, and so it'd be sent up to Mound City for repairs, and then it would rejoin the West Gulf blockading squadron, and the Osage will be part of the bombardment of the Spanish fort outside of Mobile on 29 March 1865 in the Blakely River. It will strike a torpedo and sink. Now, the Ozark was another one of these ironclads in with Porter's command, and they were trapped by the falling waters. Right here is going to be, now actually the falls at Alexandria, they had, the water had dropped so far that it was 3 feet 4 inches, and these ironclads needed 7 feet to really operate in this area. So what to do? Porter did not want to give up his entire fleet because he said, if I can't get them over the falls, we're going to have to destroy them. In steps Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Bailey, and Bailey is actually going to be chief engineer of the 19th Corps. He is a lumberman engineer from Wisconsin. And so basically, he will build two wing dams, as they're called. You can see one's made out of just logs, one's made out of stone cribs. And basically, he uses the 29th Maine, as well as the 97th USCT, as well as the 99th USCT to build these dams. Oh my gosh, the dams broke. And so this was terrible. And so what will happen is that they have to build yet a new supporting dam further upriver to enable the rest of the ships to escape. After the war, believe it or not, the Osage will be sold to an undisclosed buyer. And the Ironclad was actually used by Louisiana Governor William Pitt Kellogg to transport soldiers and police from New Orleans to apprehend the perpetrators of what was known as the Colfax massacre. And this was a terrible situation where freedmen seeking the right to vote, and of course, white terror struck back at it. Actually, there's an excellent book about this, which I've read, called The Colfax Massacre, The Untold Story of Black Power, White Terror, and the Death of Reconstruction. Well, the Ozark will serve in that and then will disappear. The Nishoto, the other monitor in the Red River, will actually survive the Red River campaign and will serve during the Franklin-Nashville campaign. And actually, along with the poop turtle Caronlet, they will bombard Confederate batteries on the Cumberland River near Bell's Mills, Tennessee on 6 December. And actually, during that engagement, the Nishoto was going to be hit 100 times, but not seriously damaged. During the Battle of Nashville, the Nishoto is going to actually, Battle of Nashville is 15 to 16 December 1864, will actually fire on the Confederate right wing. The ship will be sold for scrap in 1874. Now let's get to the best river monitors that existed during the war, or perchance the most effective of them. They are going to be known as the Milwaukee-class. Now, the Milwaukee-class is going to be a double-turreted monitor, and it consisted of 4 ships: the Chickasaw, the Kickapoo, the Milwaukee, and the Winnebago. James Eads actually had received the contract to build these monitors. However, he was in such a rush to get them done that he could only build 2 at the Union Iron Works, and that would be the Milwaukee and the Winnebago at the Union Iron Works in Cartelet, Missouri. Now, Eads got this contract because he was friends with Congressman Frank Preston Blair Jr., who was a political powerhouse in Washington. Now, Eads is going to subcontract the construction of the Chickasaw to Thomas G. Gaylord and the Kickapoo to G. B. Allen. Both shipyards were alike. All the ironclads were alike except the Chickasaw, which had 2 Erickson-designed turrets, whereas all the others had an Eads designed turret 4 and an Erickson designed turret abaft. Otherwise, the turrets and the monitors all looked alike. Basically, the Erickson turrets became the rage only because Erickson became the rage because of the USS Monitor. But his turret wasn't the best turret out there. It has its entire weight sitting on a spindle. a central spindle that had to be elevated in order for the turret to operate in battle and to rotate in a brass ring. The Eads turrets were totally different. In fact, resembled more of the modern style turrets and are somewhat similar to the coal turrets, which are built in England by Cowper Coles. And so basically, Eads turrets rested on a number of ball bearings underneath the outer edge of the turret. The guns were mounted on a steam-powered platform that moved up and down, that basically the guns could be loaded. Guns could be lowered below the deck, safe from enemy fire, and actually could be loaded using the steam power and brought back into action using the steam power. This is amazing. So all turret functions are steam power. You only needed 6 men in an Eads turret to operate versus 16 in an Erickson turret. So all of a sudden, we're recognizing that Erickson wasn't the true answer to everything. Now, I have to tell you, the characteristics of these ships are going to be, they have a displacement of 1,300 tons. They're big monitors. They're 229 feet in length. They have a beam of 56 feet. They have a draft of 6 feet. That's all just excellent. They're run by two-cylinder horizontal non-condensing steam engines driving 2 propellers. They could make 9 knots, and they had a crew of 138 men. Now they're armed with 2 11-inch Dahlgren shell guns in each turret. These vessels are well protected. They're going to feature 8 inches of iron on their turrets. The side armor is going to be 3 inches. The deck is going to be 0.75 to 1.5 inch, and the pilot house is going to be 3 inches thick. I'm not so sure that was good. Now, immediately, the Winnebago are going to be, and the Chickasaw are going to be placed into service, and they're going to be detailed to the West Gulf Blockading Squadron. Now, on August 5th, 1864, these twin turreted monitors are going to be the 3rd and 4th monitor in the line of monitors coming into Mobile Bay. The whole idea of Farragut's plan was to bring the monitors, because he also has 2 much heavier arm class monitors, the Manhattan and the Tecumseh. Those bad boys have 15-inch Dahlgren, and so that gave them even a greater power to not only damage Confederate ironclads, because we know 15-inch Dahlgrens could punch a hole in a Confederate casemate, but they're just heavier ironclads, and so that's why they led the column. You can see they're painted as they're supposed to look in the West Gulf Squadron. And so they come in a column. They're supposed to protect the wooden ships from, number 1, the fire of Fort Morgan, and number 2, from the Confederate squadron that right now is coming into action. You can see from this map how this line is coming in, and of course they're going to have to cross over a line of torpedoes, and the Tecumseh will go slightly out of line. It will strike a torpedo. 90 seconds later, it will be sunk. And so basically everything is shot, right? But the Federals know to hold their ironclads there. The Union wooden ship line stops. They're under a barrage from Fort Morgan. And that is when, of course, Farragut issues his immortal, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. He didn't say exactly that. But the bottom line is the fleet of the Hartford will go around the Richmond that actually had this torpedo rake that had been designed by Erickson. It was a foolish thing. And so basically, the wooden ships are going to be able to pass. The Tennessee is so slow, it can't catch up. And so the Federals will go out to a section of Mobile Bay known as the Anchorage. The two ironclads, the river monitors, the Winnebago and the Chickasaw, will actually stay behind bombarding Fort Morgan. And actually, the Winnebago had its aft turret jammed, and the Chickasaw had its funnel riddled with holes that she virtually lost power, and they had to pour oil tar and oily rags onto the fires to get enough draft to get them past Fort Morgan. So this is a dangerous point in the battle. And so now, we think, oh, these are these fabulous models that are made. I'm just going to pause for a second. Made by a man known as you see here, Joseph Schmidt. And they're little miniature models. And you can see there's the size of a quarter. So he made over 300 of those models and donated them to, of course, the Mariners Museum. And so we have these, you can see the turtle back design. You can see where they're having a covering in the back. You can see how the pilot house is behind the forward turret. And that's, of course, going to be an Eads turret. The turrets don't look any different in design, but they are greatly different. And you actually could look at them and tell them apart. And so this is, of course, the Winnebago. This is the Chickasaw in reality. So you can see how the model is made and how the Chickasaw is going to look when it's in service. This is one mean ironclad, I want to tell you. So around 9 o'clock in the morning, they start this battle at 6:45. By almost 7:45, they're past the forts, Fort Morgan and Fort Gaines. And so they go to the Anchorage. Farragut says, oh, you guys can have breakfast now. And, Percival Drayton says, they've been through a lot. Should they get some whiskey? And Farragut says, no, I'm going to have cold coffee, so can they. And Farragut's a hard guy. And so, but all of a sudden, Farragut sees what? I did not think old Buck would be such a fool, said Farragut. And Buchanan is getting ready to attack the entire Union fleet. He merely commented to the Tennessee's ship captain, James Johnson, that if we have an ironclad and we don't try it, we'll be damned forevermore. And so in goes the Tennessee. Now, unfortunately, the Tennessee is going to get rammed, as you can see in this image, on several occasions, okay? Now, basically, what we're seeing is part of the scene where, and then there's the Winnebago over there. Here is the Chickasaw closest to us. This is where the Lackawanna, actually rams the Hartford right where Farragut is up in the rigging and actually cracks the ship down to the waterline. Farragut says everything's okay, let's go on fighting, and he tells the Lackawanna to get out of the way because he wants to do the ramming. Now, the Tennessee is supposed to do the ramming, but there's a big problem with the Tennessee, and the Tennessee is going to have no real motive power because of the Chickasaw. The Chickasaw will take a position right off the stern of the Tennessee. And so even though the 11-inch shells could not penetrate the Tennessee's armor, and the Tennessee was one of the best armored of all Confederate casemated ironclads, it's going to have 6 inches of armor on its casemate. So that's a lot, but still it doesn't resolve the 15-inch gun. We don't see the Manhattan in this picture, but it's going to blast the Tennessee on its own. But we care more about the Manhattan did. We care more about the Chickasaw right there. Now, the Chickasaw is going to fire a shot, and the range is anywhere from 10 to 50 feet. So imagine a 136-pound shell flying in the air, and number one shot knocks down the smokestack. So smoke comes all into the casemate. Now, then another shot from the Chickasaw will actually break the steering chains. So the Tennessee is going to be motionless in the water, and actually both the Manhattan and the Chickasaw had jammed the port shutters, which you can barely see in this picture above one of the ports, jammed the port shutters so that they couldn't fire the guns. Well, you know, you got to have those port shutters open if you're going to fight. And Buchanan's hopping mad. He actually said, look, if I'm killed or wounded, just lay me down by the side and keep on fighting. Well, a machinist is trying to repair the stern gun port of the Tennessee, and the machinist is there with hammers, and guess who's supervising him? Yes, Buchanan. And all of a sudden, a shot from the Chickasaw will hit the port sill, knocking the shutter off, instantly killing the machinist and sending bolts, iron splinters, and wooden splinters inside the Tennessee. Even though they had anti-splinter netting, it was horrible with inside the Tennessee. As they said, there was brain, blood, and bones everywhere. And so, all of a sudden, Buchanan is hit by a bolt in his right leg, the same leg injured during the battle on March 8, 1862. So Buchanan doesn't care. However, with that shot, it is pretty sure that the Ironclad could no longer go on fighting. So James Johnson goes ahead and surrenders the Tennessee, and the first phase of the Battle of Mobile Bay is going to be over. Now, I have to tell you, there's nothing but carnage on the Tennessee. Actually, this was an extremely fierce battle. And after the Tennessee is captured, repaired, and put back in action, the Chickasaw and the Winnebago is going to actually participate in the shelling of Fort Gaines and Fort Morgan. Here's a nice view of the Winnebago. Basically, you can go in Fort Gaines and you can see the impact of one of the 11-inch shells. And they actually have a little sign there. This is where the Chickasaw damaged Fort Gaines. Fort Gaines is across the harbor entrance from Fort Morgan, so they will be bombarded until both forts will eventually surrender. However, we're not done in Mobile Bay. And so the Chickasaw and the Winnebago are going to be joined by their sister ships, the Kickapoo and the Milwaukee. And so the U.S. Army there, under the command of Major General E.S. Canby, is going to be operating from the east of Mobile, trying to capture Mobile itself. There are several rivers in this estuary, including one known as the Blakely River. Let me tell you, the Confederates have two major forts, Fort Blakely and the Spanish fort, because Mobile used to be controlled by the Spanish at one time. And they also have several ironclads. The Nashville, which wasn't much, floating batteries, the Tuscaloosa and the Huntsville, they could make 3 knots, so they couldn't stem the tides. But anyway, the Federals had to work against them. And so in operating in the Blakely River, even though the river had been, as we call it, swept of torpedoes, the Milwaukee is going to strike a torpedo on the 28th of March, 1865, and will go to the bottom. I have to tell you, the crew will be saved by the Kickapoo. The next day, the Kickapoo is going to witness the Osage striking a torpedo, and the Kickapoo also comes in. And I have to tell you, they will serve for the rest of the war. The siege of Mobile doesn't end until May 9th. The Union Ironclads have played a very, very major, this is incorrect, I hate to say, this is going to be the Marietta-class, because that's the stern wheel back there, but still you can see how small it is and how excellent it is. Once again, a turtleback design. Oh my goodness, it's a tremendous weapon. Now, what's going to happen is at the end of the war, what are we going to do with all these ironclads? Some of them, like the Ozark, is a piece of junk. The Osage and the Milwaukee will be raised and turned into scrap, and some of that scrap is going to be used in the building of the Eads Suspension Bridge over the Mississippi River in St. Louis, Missouri. Oh my gosh, how powerful is that? However, the Chickasaw will be sold to unknown owners, and on 12 September 1874, and it will actually be converted into a side wheeler. As a side wheeler, it's going to become as a coal and railroad ferry for the Mobile and Western Railroad, and it serves in that position, ready for this, until 1944, when it was scuttled. Yet it's not the oldest monitor to stay afloat in the U.S. Navy. That would be the Aphrodite. But the big thing is that there's a Union monitor that lasts until 1953, when they build the Chesapeake Bay Bridge between Sandy Point and Love Point in the Upper Bay. But let's not be done with our river monitors, because they have yet another class known as the Marietta class. And the Marietta class is a two-ship class known as, the other ship is known as the Sandusky, as you can see here. These ships are not finished by the end of the war, and they never enter service, and will be scrapped in, or decommissioned and scrapped in 1874. So the big idea of river monitors is pretty powerful. And the big question is, what made them successful? Well, number one, having a turret gives you greater strength than a casemate. And the river monitors actually had more iron on their turrets than the casemates had on the City class design and several other ships. So that made it very, very important. They actually had a very shallow draft, and the Milwaukee-class of river monitors is the most outstanding. It has excellent firepower, excellent draft, excellent engines. It has the best turret. I know I am Director Emeritus of the Monitor Center, but save me, but I believe that the Eads turrets are better than the monitor turrets. They didn't jam as badly, and they actually were less to man, and actually quicker to fire, and had better protection for the crew members within the turrets themselves. So the Milwaukee class could have been improved had it had a 15-inch gun, but whereas it had two 11-inch guns, it was very serviceable and plays a major role in the conquest of not only Mobile Bay, but Mobile, Alabama, the Alabama Squadron of Confederate Ironclads, Selma, Alabama, and other important industrial centers in southern Alabama at the very end of the Civil War. So without further ado, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Thank you. We do have questions. Thank you, John. We learned from a Wisconsinite that it is Winnebago. Just for our edification for next time, since it's an Indian name, and thank you for that, Peter. And we do have questions. We have, which books would you recommend about the various classes of ironclads that someone might be able to access?
Well, number one, Silverstone, Paul Silverstone, will tell you all about the different classes, give you all the dimensions, all that great stuff. Peter Canby, Canley has an excellent series about ironclads published by the Naval Institute Press, which is just outstanding. There's a great book by Olmsted and Spencer Tucker. I can't remember the other author, about the armaments for all these monitors. So you start to understand it's not only building a monitor, it's actually also how we're going to arm it to make it more effective. And so that all played a role. My book, History of Ironclads, is pretty good in describing the various different classes that we're going to see during the war. And, I go into great detail about the various ones. And so I think if I had to just limit myself to a couple of books, those are the books I'd use, and you probably could find everything you really needed to document not only river monitors, but all monitors in the US fleet, let's put it that way. We're not talking about, a lot of people forget that monitors are built everywhere. I mean, monitors were a rage. We sold designs, Ericsson sold designs to the Russians, the Swedes, and so forth. In fact, a Austrian monitor is going to fire the first shot of World War I. So anyway, and actually a British monitor twin turreted no less, will fight during the D-Day invasion. So
wow. Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
David asked, during the Battle of Mobile Bay, were these exploding shells or solid shot used by the monitors?
Exploding shells, believe it or not.
And jumping over to the other box. Hold one second, here we go. How were the Ozark's guns arranged, Kevin asked.
The Ozark, basically, they had the turret, and then they had a 10-inch gun at the very bow. Then coming down where the, I guess you'd call it the ship house was built of pine, you had two 9-inch Dahlgrens, and then at the stern you had another 9-inch Dahlgren. Those ones on port and starboard sides are actually the ones they're going to try to have the pipe guns, and that's a crazy idea, and so they don't make that happen. So the Ozark was, everything about it was weird, and it was low powered, it hogged, so its design was compromised, and it was the least effective, in my opinion, of all river monitors.
Mike asked, wasn't Porter's fleet weighted down with Confederate cotton they had captured, or CSA cotton, but they didn't want to abandon the cotton because the crew received portions of the sale of said cotton?
Don't they wish? The big trouble is that the Confederates burned the cotton as they retreated because they knew what the Federals were up to. They also thought, the Federals, Banks said that, oh, all these people in Western Louisiana are going to love the Union. I went, really? He wrote that in the official records, and that they're going to sell us their cotton and they'll be happy to do so. Oh, no, the Confederates didn't want the Federals to get the cotton. And so actually with the Ozark or the Osage, they actually take armor off the ship to get it off ground. The Eastport will be so badly grounded, it hogs, and they have to destroy the vessel. So no, they were desperate. So they didn't want to have anything extra. Just think, most of these ships I talk about have well, except for the Milwaukee-class, they have a 7-foot draft. Over the falls on 28 April 1864, there is 3 foot 4 inches of water. There's no thought of taking cotton with you because you're lucky to get those ironclads to escape. And the Confederates wanted them all, to be trapped so that they then could, when the river rose again, which it would in November, then the Federal or the Confederates would have an ironclad fleet. And they'd be happy Confederates, I guess.
Okay. Well, Tom's asking a question that you're going to cover in a lecture next January. So don't talk too much about Trent's Reach, but he's asking, can you speak to the operations of river monitors on the James in Virginia in 1864 at the battles of Trent's Reach and Howlett's Bluff?
Those are technically not river monitors. Those are monitors built in Eastern shipyards. A river monitor is a monitor, I should have said this at the beginning, like the Onondaga is built up in the north on the East Coast. That is one of those ships at Trent's Reach. the river monitors are exactly that, built in St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Condelay. So technically, we don't have river monitors. We do have the Atlanta serving in the James River during those 2 engagements, but the Atlanta does not get involved. The Atlanta does fire guns during the Battle of Chaffin's Bluff, but other than that, no.
Thank you for clarifying that.
It's a simple distinction.
Yeah.
River
Where they were
monitor
built.
in the river. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's good.
Mhm.
David asked, can you elaborate on the monitor that was still afloat in 1953?
I certainly can. And I brought my book about ironclads so that I thought about it at the very last moment. There's what it looked like. Right down there, it was turned into a ship house for a workshop in Elizabeth City. The Aphrodite was one of those ships built at the very end of the Civil War and would be modified into what we call a new monitor with a better, what it would be called a breastwork monitor. And then the Navy, being cheap, they have this nice hull, and so they keep using it. Actually, this ship is not struck from the Navy list until 1937, and yet it gets reused in shipyards, workshops in Elizabeth City. Actually, it was a floating hotel in Florida during Prohibition that was gambling. And so how'd you like to be on a monitor in Florida gambling and drinking? I don't know about you all, but that may not be where I want to be. So then they get real smart. And so some private individuals will actually acquire the Aphrodite, and they will take it up to what is known as Sandy Point. That's where the Chesapeake Bay Bridge comes into the western shore of the Chesapeake, and they set it up as a hotel, thinking that everyone's going to want to stop there before they cross the bridge and go to Ocean City. Well, just imagine that it didn't work, and it will be towed to Baltimore and will be scrapped by Patapsco Scrap and Iron Works at Sparrows Point, Baltimore, Maryland.
Not a very good business plan on that one, was it?
No, I don't think so. But it's amazing. So that's the oldest ironclad or monitor that we see in the U.S. Navy anyway. So, and the Chickasaw technically was not in the U.S. Navy. Actually, it was sold to private interests.
We have 3 more questions. John, the Tecumseh carried 2 15-inch Dahlgrens, which
Yes.
Farragut believed would be more than a match for Tennessee. Do you agree with him?
Oh, without a doubt. We know that right away from the Battle of Wassaw Sound. The Weehawken has one 15-inch shell gun and one 11-inch shell gun. And in 5 shots, they force the Atlanta surrender. And 3 of those shots are from 15-inch solid shot, which is I mean, they're close in shots, 75 yards away, but that shows the impact. I mean, you got a rigid face that's backed by 24 inches of pine and oak, and you got 2 layers of 2-inch iron plate, but it's rigid. And so you have this moving ball, and what is it going to do? Smash into it and actually force the iron plates to back into themselves, that forces the iron plates back into the casemate, which forces the casemate structure to fall apart. And actually daylight appears on the deck of the Atlanta. Farragut knew what he was talking about. So did everybody.
Think before surrender.
Yeah, I'm right.
Scott asked, did the Manhattan's 15-inch Dahlgrens penetrate the armor of the Tennessee?
Yes, they did. There was daylight coming in.
Okay.
And very close in the stern port side gun port. And so it just, it was already being weakened by all the other guns firing and the ramming. And you have to realize the Tennessee was not a fast ship to begin with. And so once it lost its motive power, it was just a sitting duck. And the Chickasaw took the best advantage by where it positioned itself. It was harder for the Confederates to aim their Brook guns at that target.
And our last question today from Douglas. During battle, did the sailors seriously suffer from concussions and hearing loss and other debilitating internal wounds not physically noticed?
We know that from the concussion of shot that doesn't break through a turret or a casemate, we do know that they suffer concussions. They do not suffer internal injuries. And I just don't see the record of it. The Monitor, you have quite a few people concussed. You do have people with hernias that because they're lifting up heavy shot, but once a shot explodes on a port sill of a Confederate casemate, once it breaks through the casemate of the Atlanta, well, I think I told the story of the Arkansas earlier this year, and brain, bloods, and bone dripping from the side. Of course, that ship had the worst armor of, well, maybe not the worst armor, but it had pretty bad armor. I think the Keokuk perhaps had the worst, but anyway, that's another story.
Well, I believe one of your authors that you recommend, Paul Silverstone, says thanks for the note. So we thank you, Paul, for writing such a great resource.
I have to thank Paul very much because that is one of my Bibles.
Yeah.
You know, I don't start an article or a book unless I'm referencing it. So it's one of my treasures, or a couple of treasures I have. And
that, and along with your official record set, not
oh
too
my
many
God.
people have that in their dining room, but John does.
No, it's now it's been officially renamed my writing room.
Okay, good.
My accountant.
And you are welcome to send John questions that we didn't get to answer, since we're over time just a bit here, to him directly at johncorstein@gmail.com. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer you. And just want to give a shout out to November 3rd will be our next presentation. Don't look for many slides. I've got to warn you, it's on naval intelligence in Hampton Roads during 1861 and 1862. There just weren't a lot of pictures. So just beware. I
just want to explain
that
this was requested by over 20 people.
Yes.
To do
and
this
it's going to be a great talk, but not a lot of a lot of images. So just know that coming in, but John is fascinating to listen to without that. So that's on November 3rd. And then on November 12th, he will talk about the Victory Arch in downtown Newport News, which the second version of it still stands today. And it's quite a moving story about the end of World War I and continuing to honor people in World War II and today. So we look forward to your joining us next time. Watch on YouTube in about a week. You can see this one and hundreds of other programs about the museum on our YouTube channel. And with that, John, thank you so much yet again for sharing your expertise, and for all of you tuning in from all around the world. Thank you. See you next time.
Sink before surrender.